Cuba Trade and Economic Council President John Kavulich on what this could mean for business relations. John, obviously, if we dial them back to say nothing of just cutting them off, the big distinction, of course, it changes things. Now, people who are pro the Obama deal say that we get a seat at a table that others have had for a long time, and we lose it again if we don't. What do you say?
Unfortunately, Neil, the reason that we're here today is because of what the Obama administration didn't do in terms of making more changes to regulations and more changes to policies, and the Cuban government didn't do in terms of accepting many of those changes. So the U.S. business community is looking at what the Trump administration has announced, and it's disappointing, but U.S. companies are going to be adaptive. The role of the Cuban military in the Cuban economy is substantial. It's increasing. If you want to use an optic, it's like a great big spider that gobbles up little spiders, and then it uses the energy to create a bigger web and then get bigger. It's metastasizing. So it is going to be difficult for U.S. companies to operate in Cuba without touching the Cuban military, but it's possible. And much of the efforts now will be in the next 30, 60, 90 days as the regulations are promulgated, and U.S. companies will go to the Treasury Department, the Commerce Department, State Department, White House, and make their case. And hopefully the Trump administration will listen to some of the nuances and make certain that what entry U.S. companies do have is able to be sustained. But there's no question that everyone is prepared for less today than there was yesterday.
All right. This would be done how, then? In other words, I don't even remember. With Barack Obama, there was no congressional sort of input on this, right? I mean, and there presumably wouldn't be here as well.
That's correct. When President Obama made changes to the Treasury Department regulations and the Commerce Department regulations, he did so unilaterally. When President Trump is making changes to the Treasury regulations and the Commerce regulations, he's doing so unilaterally. So President Obama upset those who didn't want to see any changes, and President Trump is upsetting those who didn't want to see any changes.
So let me get your sense then of what happens. A lot of people, for example, tourism, as I know, boomed in Cuba since this, thawing in relations here. I understand that would not be affected here, but in other words, you go part of a cruise to Cuba, you still can, but there's a distinction made if you travel alone there. I didn't understand that. Can you explain that to me?
They're still, I think, gelling that together. Treasury Department did issue moments ago a updated frequently asked questions, but the reality is, tourism, traveling to Cuba for the purpose of tourism remains illegal by the Trade Sanctions Reform and Export Enhancement Act of 2000. There are 12 authorized categories. Educational travel is within that category. President Obama had reversed a Bush administration decision which required everyone going to Cuba for educational or what's called people-to-people go in groups. And the purpose was to put more bodies into Cuba. The Trump administration is saying we're no longer going to allow certain categories, people-to-people, to go individually. What that does is impact the airlines, because the airlines gained because people just hopped on planes and went to Cuba for purposes other than what they were supposed to do. But it'll benefit the cruise lines because cruise lines do well with group tours. They know how to do that. And, for example, when a 2,000-passenger vessel from Norwegian or Royal Caribbean docks at the port of Havana, 2,000 people just wander off on their own. And now going back to requiring group travel, they'll need to get on buses, and so it'll be organized, and the cruise lines will probably make more money. But there's no question that there has been abuse. There was abuse during the Bush administration, which then resulted in the Bush administration making changes that impacted the U.S. business community as sort of collateral damage. And now this is going to be the same. And unfortunately, some of the travel agents and the tour operators just pushed the envelope too hard. And they were doing some things that were just egregious and screaming tourism. And, they shouldn't be surprised at what's happening.
All right, we'll watch closely, John. Thank you. I mean, but as you said, last time wasn't done with congressional approval, this time without congressional approval, but it would be sweeping nonetheless, this just in reverse.